All right, so all important you see in the middle of this graphic is the student enrollment file. And that's because the student enrollment file establishes enrollment, but more importantly, it gives you ownership of that student and their records. So before you can submit the SELA, the student information, the program, or the student with disability records, well, for most of them, you need to have an enrollment, right? You have to have an enrollment. And so once that's submitted and posted to CALPADS, you can then submit the other files. And so these are all the files that will be required for Fall 1. In total, there's 8. Most students, you just need 4 student SENR, SINF, SELA, and SPRG. But for students with disabilities, coming from your SED system, your SEDS data coordinator will submit the status, the plan, the meet, and the SERV. And we'll talk more about these file types shortly. So all the data that's submitted in Fall 1 is used throughout the year, right? So in Fall 1, we start what is called the student data profile. That's where we have their demographics, their program participation, their English language acquisition status. That's the basics of the profile. And that's where we also identify students' special education eligibility. So on Fall 2, the demographic information is used in course enrollment. Their attendance information is used in course enrollment. Those students who have been identified as EL will be identified as requiring EL services. And then we have post-secondary information for students from the previous year, those CTE completers from the previous year. And end of year 1, again, you have course completion, CTE participation and concentrators and completers. And so the demographics is used again for course completion and CTE participation. One of the key things in CTE participation is there's a indication of disadvantaged students in CTE, as well as for your CTE completers and those who are participants, an indication if they're in a non-traditional gender. For end of year 2 program participation, we'll use the demographic information submitted from the students and the EL information. It's a whole different set of programs. And the end of year 3, of course, you know, your discipline, absence summary, and cumulative enrollment, you're going to definitely need the demographic information for discipline. There's disproportionality in discipline. So in addition to racial disproportionality, the students with disabilities have a disproportionality in discipline that will be identified. Your absenteeism. And then end of year 4, you submit your students with disability files again, but those records that you established in Fall 1 will be reported again for end of year 4 in many cases. So Fall 1 data will affect your CALPADS information for the entirety of the reporting cycle or the reporting year. Here's the illustration, a very generalized illustration of the data cycle for CALPADS. On the left, you have your 2 local systems, the SED system, which you use to transmit data for students with disabilities via API to CALPADS, and your student information system, which most of you here are proficient with, and you submit data for all students. CALPADS also can provide you with the SSID in matching students or new students, but most of the time you're submitting data from your SIS into CALPADS. And then CALPADS is a repository of data. It identifies anomalies, it validates incoming data, it generates new SSIDs, it sends data to TOMS for ELPAC testing or SPAC testing. And TOMS in turn provides information such as the EL or IFEP status for those students who go in as TBD, get tested. TOMS determines that, or TOMS provides us with the ELPAC results. And then CALPAD interfaces directly with state databases via foster youth matching, direct certification. They're working currently on finding a way to get an automated process to identify migrant ed students. And now we will move directly into the different file types. So the student enrollment file, the SSID enrollment file, the SENR, whatever you call it, it's used to obtain SSIDs for students who have never been enrolled in California public school. These SSIDs are needed for LPAC testing, CAASPP testing, students with disability monitoring. It establishes ownership of students. We emphasized that earlier. It designates the student school of attendance. It designates the district of geographic residence for transfer students. It determines special education enrollment statuses, cohort determination. We update the SENR to report no-show students, denote returning, transfer, and matriculating students, and resolve anomalies. So it's not a big file, but it does have tremendous importance. Some of the things that are data elements in the student enrollment file are the grade level. And so when you think about TK grade level reporting, every year we're changing the rules of who is the eligible student. So this year, students that turn 5 between September 2nd and June 2nd are eligible to be TKs. Although we understand some districts have early TKs, the TKs that will show up on reports are those that turn 5 between September 2nd and June 2nd. Next year, your TK students will have to be 4 by September 1st, right? So next year it's more restrictive, and it will align with our kindergarten reporting rules that we have now, where you have to be 5 by September 1st. So just to talk about grade levels by age, last year we got rid of toddler. So a student is an infant, 0 to 3, right? Or until they turn 3. Those are your students. A large part are going to be reported because they have special education services of some type, and they're in the IFSP. Your preschool students are generally 3 to 5 years old, right? Again, we got rid of toddlers, so 3 to 5 years old, they get the grade level of PS. Of course, a 5-year-old in kindergarten wouldn't have a PS grade level, or 5-year-old or 4-year-old in TK would have a TK grade level. But for special education, you could have a 5-year-old and their grade level could be preschool still. And then you have TK and kindergarten, which have age minimums, but they don't have age highs, right? So sometimes you have 6-year-olds in TK or kindergarten. So, and then we've had guidance, I would say late spring and through the summer, it changed a bit. How are the expectations of how we report students with disabilities? And so that's what this chart provides us, right? And so those students who are less than 3 on IFSP should be enrolled with the enrollment status of 50, non-ADA. And the enrollment start date should be the date of parental consent. The grade level should be infant, right? Those students who are 3 to 5 should have primary enrollments, preschool grade level. Their enrollment start date should be the date of their 3rd birthday, right? And then if you don't have a preschool specific code, you can use the district level CDS. If you have a preschool code, you can use that for the school of enrollment. Then if you have students who are 3 to 5 that are in private school, you would enroll them with the enrollment status of 50. So this was a big change. Previously, guidance was all preschool enrollments were primary enrollments at the district. Well, we now understand that you can have a preschool student receiving special education services at a private school. Again, instead of the student's 3rd birthday, it would be the date of parental consent, grade level preschool, enroll the student at the private school group code, and then grade level students or age School age students, I should say, are those who are 5 to 21 enrolled in at least TK. Primary enrollment, their first day enrollment, and they should have whatever the grade level is appropriate for their normal instruction. And if they're in private school, they have that 50 enrollment status. Their enrollment start date should be the date of parental consent. Remember, for students in private school, we don't necessarily care about their private school education. We care about the services provided related to their ISP in private school. So that's why it's the day of parental consent. When do they begin services? So they might have been in private school in September, but started receiving special education services in October. That's why the date of parental consent for those services is the start date. And then we enroll them in private school group code. One thing I want to point out with your students with disabilities, you see at no time, nowhere, enrollment status 20. That's not an option. All students with disabilities will be primary enrollments or private school enrollments, 50. You never enroll a student with disability with a secondary enrollment. I mean, unless they have a secondary enrollment and you're not providing them services. Whoever's providing them services would not have a secondary enrollment. And then we also want to remind you this summer, new validations were put in forth for those districts that are district of choice. If you're a district of choice, your entire student population have to have a transfer code. If they're outside of your district, perhaps most likely that's going to be a 4. If they're within your district boundaries, then the guidance was 6/281 provides that guidance. District transfer code 6 is other. And then if you populate a transfer code, you have to populate the district of geographic residence. That's a 7-digit CDS number for the district or the school district they would be coming from. So that's enough about the enrollment. The student information provides nothing. Just kidding. Student information is very important. It provides your race ethnicity data. It's used to update gender change and legal name change. The one thing you have to note is the gender and name cannot be referenced in one transaction. You have to do one or the other and then post it and then come back in and do it. They won't let you do both. And they have to be done online. You can't do it in a file submission. Part of the matching, and since the post redesign, I haven't tested it to make sure the rules stay the change. But traditionally, that's what it was. So if you try to do it in a file submission and it's rejected, historically, you had to update the gender and name online. But I haven't verified that this is still true. Then it's used to update the residence and mailing address. So your students may have a residential address, but you mail them separately. I think for SBAC mailing, you have the different mailing address. The data, the demographic data that you submit for your students is needed for matching, right? Direct cert is used to match students for the testing, LPAC and CAASPP. In fact, if you submit enrollment updates for students and never submit the demographic information, CAASPP will not include those students for testing. It's used to determine Title III eligible immigrants. And the parent education level in the student information system is used to identify students that may be included in the socially economically disadvantaged subgroup. So speaking of that, the only way a student qualifies for SED based on parent education level is if the parent is not a high school graduate. That's code 14. If both parents are not high school graduates, the student is also included. If two parents are reported and one parent reports anything other than not a high school graduate, the student's not included. Even do not report or failure to report will discount the student from being included. There's other criteria. So, if the student is income eligible, right? A direct cert or NSLP student, homeless, migrant, foster youth, they're included in the social economically disadvantaged. But based on just your parent ed, so your SED count is generally a little bit, I don't know if it's higher or not, to be honest, but there's this additional criteria where students could be included if their parents are not high school graduate. And so there's always a little bit of difference between your LCFF count and your SED count. And so we just want to point that out. Hopefully it's clear as mud. And if I wasn't clear enough, grill Kyron, Matt, and Marshall in the chat box. Student English language acquisition status. All right, your SELA records are used to identify students' status eligible for LPAC testing. So those students who have a TBD, they're going to be LPAC tested. Identify students eligible for EL services, right? As a result of the LPAC testing, those EL students then are not just required, but they should receive EL services. Include students in economically disadvantaged subgroup for LCFF. So as we know, we have your FRPM eligible students, and then in addition to those are the students that are English learners. Identify EL students who become English proficient, right? They've been EL for a while, and they've met criteria to no longer be EL students, now English proficient. Those are the RFEP students. SELA records also, one thing you don't see featured here, SELA records are also used to determine who your long-term ELs are, the LTELs. A student's primary language at home is a key data element in the SELA. The English language acquisition status and the English language acquisition status date. And so why is the date important? So if you have a student who's EL on October 15th and TBD on October 2nd, they're not eligible for LCFF funding because they were a TBD on October 2nd, right? It's EL students on Census Day. And so one thing you can do now is identify, well, I guess you could have done it. It's a little bit late now. It is what it is. Any TBDs that hopefully they're eligible for some other reason. All right, so student programs, right? This is the last file that comes from the SIS for fall 1 of the 4. Student program is used to determine eligibility for federal and state programs. Many of these programs include students in accountability subgroups. They report in EL instructional strategies, the LIP program, and they include students in the LCFF. And Kyron will talk more about the accountability subgroups, and in doing so, he'll talk about these programs. One thing I do want to say about the programs is there are certification errors to find missing data, right? Every student's expected to have a race ethnicity reported. If nothing's reported, CALPADS traditionally gives you an error. It's not the CERT 004 anymore, but we have a CDD for it, right? If a student doesn't have an English language acquisition status, it used to be the CERT 67, right? CALPADS has validations to find missing data. There are no validations for programs because CALPADS cannot say a student is expected to be a member of a program. So it's very important for you to locally verify your program counts, the eligibility and participation counts for your programs, because CALPADS doesn't have a validation in place to help you identify that, okay? I just wanted to point that out. There generally are no fatal errors associated with programs. If you report a program incorrectly, there's validations, but not for a program that's missing. One exception If you have an EL student and they don't have a LIT program, we will tell you that. All right, students with disability status, right? The SWIDs. This file was introduced last year. Well, all four were introduced last year, but this really presented new data. And this file is used to track changes in special education eligibility and participation. Historically, since the C2C transition in 2018, 2019, I think, the reports were just having a hard time identifying all the students, right? And so they created a status to help identify who should be included on the reports. They qualify student record to be included on reports, spoke to that, makes it easy to determine if a student is eligible and participating on a report. Again, that's the purpose of it. A key function now is it exits students from the special education program. And so you have your participation and your status, and those fields are used to, one, identify students who are eligible or not eligible, and then if they're not eligible or if they're eligible and they're not participating, why. The special education meetings file, the MEET, tracks whether or not meetings that are statutory required are being held in a timely manner. They denote delay to meetings or amendments and monitor students on reports. They're used to help monitor students on reports 16.7 and 16.8. These are not 16.7 and 16.8 are not certification or snapshot reports, so they're under accountability and monitoring. Special education plan, or the plan file. Plan records are used to determine the key data elements of each students with disabilities plan that identifies their primary disability, why or what makes them eligible for special education, the plan type, whether it's ISP, IFSP, IEP, the program setting, and the general education participation range, which go a long way in determining the student's least restrictive environment. And then you have special education services, the SERV, the SERV file. While they're not required for Fall 1 in terms of reports, the services are used for monitoring, and every plan should have associated services. And the SERV provides us with the service code, tells us what service is being provided, who the service provider is, the location of that service, and the frequency and duration. And with that, ready to pass it off to Kyron.
All right, so Nate discussed the importance of the student profile. He provided details of what file types to report and is expected for Fall 1 reporting. And so those reports will then be, or data elements in those file types will then be collated and aggregated and reflected into the different subgroups that will cater to all of these legislative requirements that we're trying to comply to, right? And so here are the sources, at least the bulk of all of the sources of data that will be used in the different subgroups. So the ones in light green, mint green, are all programs from the SPRG file. Of course, you have your light pink student with disabilities file types. You have data elements from the student information file. Then you have your SELA status. Then you have data elements as a result of the statewide matching process that we do either weekly or monthly, depending on the source. So for socioeconomically disadvantaged, the socioeconomically disadvantaged comprises of the student with disabilities. So essentially all of this direct certification all the way to tribal foster youth except GATE, okay? And then of course, front and center would be your active enrollments, right? So a student who is actively enrolled on census day who are eligible based on the different potential data sources would be included on the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup. So to get a more detailed definition on that, there is, if you go to the CALPADS user manual, go to resource, go to glossary and acronyms, and then system glossary, you should be able to see all of the definitions here. Better yet, just type socioeconomically disadvantaged and it should give you this section as well. So again, as I've mentioned, socioeconomically disadvantaged is comprised of your active enrollment on census day, free and reduced price meal, Title 1 Parsi migrant homeless, migrant program, homeless, if a student was matched as foster youth, if the student was directly certified, and if the student is in a juvenile core school, if a student was determined to be tribal foster youth, these are all parts of that. Plus, and this is just exclusive to the socioeconomically disadvantaged group, if a parent's highest grade level is 14, which is not a high school graduate, then that student will automatically be part of the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup. So if you scroll down here, Nate alluded to the logic of the inclusion in the parent ed level qualifications for SED. So if a parent, both parents are reported as not high school graduate, then they are eligible. Now, if one parent was reported as a not high school graduate and there are no second parent information reported, the student is eligible. Now, if the first parent, both parents were reported, but only the first parent has a not high school graduate, and then the second parent indicates a decline to state or the other way around. So you have a not decline to state, and then the second one is a not high school graduate. They are automatically disqualified. Then any other combinations after, they are disqualified to be counted as in the SED if the only route would be based on the parent ed level. Okay, so that's the definition for that. And so that's for the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup. Now for the local control funding formula, it would include everything here except where's this thing? Except the parent ed level. So the only difference between the socioeconomically disadvantaged and the LCFF is that you're just swapping the parent ed level with the SELA status. So if a student is EL, then the student is counted, or ADEL, the student is counted in the local control funding formula. If a student has a parent ed level of not high school graduate, then they are counted on the SED logic. All right, so we also have the free and reduced price meal subgroup. So this qualifies the student to receive free meals, right? So there are different sources for this, sources of eligibility. So if there are categorical programs and matching processes that would enable the student to be included or to be eligible for either a free or reduced price meal. There are also income-based applications that would qualify them. Okay, so let's first discuss these two areas here. You have your income eligibility form. So any student who fills out the form and you receive the form before or on or before 10/31, the forms were completed, they turn out to be eligible later on, then they automatically receive a 181 or 182, depending on the income threshold, right? And then you also have alternative income forms. These are the forms that LEAs with CEP or Provision 2-3 schools send out to students during the year, to new students, okay? So if they qualify, then of course they either get a 181 or 182. And then any student who is homeless, migrant ed, or tribal foster youth, so these three sources would come from your SPRG, and so the students would automatically receive a 181. Now, if the student is eligible only because of direct certification, if the student is a SNAP, TANF, medical free, then they automatically receive 181. Now, if it's medical reduced, then they get a 182. Now, for foster youth, this is a weekly matching. And so if a student was determined to be foster youth, then of course you get a 181 for them. Now, California has what we call the Universal Meals Program. So that means everyone who may or may not qualify based on this should be receiving free lunch, right? And so if that's the case, you shouldn't be reporting students who qualify just because of the Universal Meals Program. Okay, so you don't report a 181 or 182 for those students. You only report a program 181 or 182 if they qualify based on this criteria here. All right. So let's discuss the eligibility dates, because this is important, because even if you submit all of the data to CALPADS, if the student's dates are after census day or after a threshold or cutoff date, they won't be included on your LCFF reports. So for homeless, migrant ed, foster youth, tribal foster youth, EL and ADEL status, if their program date or SELA date is on or before census day, they are included. Any program or status after census day will not be included on the LCFF. And so that's why we were, if during our earlier trainings, we implored LEAs to start testing their students early. That way, when ELPAC sends the data back based on their completion date, then they would potentially qualify as EL. It's already 10-3 today. So if you still have students who are TBD and who are testing, unfortunately, they won't be counted on the LCFF, because obviously the completion date would be after 10-2. For the income form, you have until October 31st. So any program record, program 181 or 182, reported with the start date on or before October 31st will be included. So if you receive, as I've mentioned, a form, completed form on October 31st, however, you determine that the student be qualified after October 31st, you can backdate it to the date stamp date, okay? So now if you receive one on November 1st or 2nd, you still report them to CALPADS if they qualify later on. However, they won't be part of the LCFF. Right? And then for direct certification, any student who is matched and comes back as any of these categories between the 7-2 matching up to the November 2nd matching will be included will be eligible for direct certification, assuming that the student was actively enrolled on census day. And then not included here, of course, but it's something that you could probably also list, is your student with disabilities program dates. So if you have a student who is participating any SPED student who is eligible and participating who has a plan record on or before census day will also be included, right? And so make sure though that the SPED record is within the enrollment period, and make sure that the SWDS record and the plan record should always match the enrollment start date, because any gap between the enrollment start date and the SWDS record, the CALPADS will always will trigger an error stating, hey, the student was not eligible at this during this time period, during that gap. So make sure that all of those are reported properly. So here are some NSL program 181, 182 reporting nuances that we want to highlight. So the first one here is that is for students who were eligible last year. And this is not for, I'm not referring to students enrolled in CEP schools or Provision 2-3 schools. I'm referring to those non-CEP schools and non-Provision 2-3 schools whose students were eligible last year but are enjoying free lunch during the first 30 days of the year because you're still waiting for the income form to be returned and validated and processed and determined to be eligible, right? So do not submit a program record of 181, 182 using the first day of school or just because they were eligible last year. Never report that to CALPADS. You could probably track that in your lunch program software, but do not submit a 181 or 182 until you have determined that the student is indeed eligible. Okay. Then, of course, I've mentioned the importance of the 1031 date. And then for Provision 2 and 3 schools, if you have students who were, if this is not your base year, and you have students who come back enrolled and was determined to be eligible during your base year, that's when you could use the first day of school as your program 181 or 182. Okay. So we also have some rules with regards to Provision 2-3 and CEP schools. So you only are required to send out income applications, income eligibility applications during your base year of determination. Okay. So let's say this is your first year to be a Provision 2-3 school or CEP, then you should send the form to everyone and then determine who qualify or not. Now, for the subsequent years, so for second to the fourth year for these two categories, to the fifth year for this, if the student comes back the next year, you just roll over that eligibility. When I say roll over, you submit a new program 181 or 182 based on the base year's determination to CALPADS every year until you get the new, until you have a new base year that and you send out the new forms for them. So the question is, if the student comes back then and they qualified, report them every year. Now, who should you be requiring to fill out a form, right? The forms, the alternative income form should only be required to be sent out to new students at your district that you need to determine eligibility. You can't send all the forms to all of your students every year. Okay. So if that was, how does CALPADS know when our base year is? CDE knows. So CALPADS doesn't know if it's your base year or not. It's CDE knows if it's your base year, the accountability office or whoever manages this information. Okay. All right. So we also have, we discussed the categorical programs. So these are all of your programs, and then these, we always have questions whether what date to use, as well as do we need to close this. So bottom line is, if a student is eligible still in any of these records and they come back, then you can continue to report. You can just let that prior program that you've reported to roll over the next year. Just make sure that you made that determination that the student is still eligible. Now, you all, for some LEAs, they have a practice of closing every year and then submitting a new one every year. It's up to you guys. So, but bottom line is, we just want to know if a student has a program record active during the academic year, or more importantly for fall 1 during census day. Also, for free and reduced price meal, the program 181 and 182, that this program is automatically closed at the end of the year when you exit the student. So do not submit an SPRG record with the future end date of the student, because you never know if the student left late, and you submit a new SPRG file later on at the end of the year for updates, you will encounter SPRG 70s or SPRG 254s. All right, so how about foster youth, right? Foster youth is a result of the state matching process between CALPADS and the Department of Social Services, okay? So CALPADS will only recognize a student as foster youth if they are in these following placements: pre-placement, post-placement, permanent placement, supported transition, and voluntary placement. There may be other forms of placements, but these are the only placements that CALPADS will recognize. And as such, if the students are in these placements, those are the only ones that will be matched in CALPADS. Okay, so if you wonder why a student is foster but the reports aren't showing them as foster, the matching doesn't show them as foster, then this could be the reason why. Okay, so foster matching can be done two ways. You have here the automated matching. So any student who is actively enrolled at your district will continuously be matched at the state level, regardless if they're not foster or not. They will always send that enrollment and demographic data to the CDSS. And so it's important that the enrollment and the demographic data is accurate, right? Because CALPADS, or there won't be a match if there are some discrepancies in the demographic data. Now, if let's say you are sure that the student is eligible, but for some reason the state matching reports may be late, you expect them every, I believe, Wednesday or Thursday, and if there are some issues at the CDE level with regards to matching, you could manually match students by going to online maintenance, local foster match, and then just enter the SSID and enter either the client ID or case ID. And if the student meets those 5 placement criterias, you should be able to match them here. And then of course, for automated matching, the way to determine if a student is matched is by looking at ODS reports 5.6 to 5.9. 5.6 would be, let's go to the ODS report. So if you go to reports, ODS reports, you have here 5.6 to 5.9 under the supplemental reports. So this is where every Thursday, you could check any potential new students. Okay, so if you have students who were foster youth before and are still enrolled but are no longer foster youth, they would then be categorized and dumped into the 5.8 and 5.9 reports instead. So another foster data element is tribal foster youth. However, unlike the regular foster youth, this is self-reported by the LEA. Okay, it's a program 193. So if you are an LEA who is in an area where you have tribal communities, then we encourage you to coordinate or create a communication, create a mechanism to be able to determine if you have students who may or may not be tribal foster youth. So you have to create a consort. You may have to coordinate with tribal courts. So there is a link below in the notes that you could click on. You know what? I believe we have something in the user manual too. So if you type here tribal foster youth, so you have the definition, you have the flash that discuss that, and then of course you have the tribal youth guidance document. So download that, and then it would give you guidance on how to build that communication with your tribal foster community, tribal community. All right, so we have your Title I Parsi Migrant. So these are for students whose families are migrant workers, probably in farming communities. So if you are a district who have a large farming community like the Central Coast, Monterey, Salinas, even down to Imperial Valley, I guess, and then where else? San Fernando Valley, if there are still farms over there. So there is potential of students who are migrant students. So if you're new to CALPADS, make sure that you know who has access to the Migrant Student Information Network. If you are responsible to have access to this, create one. Just go to this website and coordinate with the organization that maintains this. So you basically go to their website. They would provide you information based on probably a demographic search, and then you report that to CALPADS with Education Program Code 135. Homeless students. So for homeless students, this is in compliance of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act, Assistance Act, and so any student who are homeless should be reported right away in CALPADS. If you know that the student, it's already 10-3. However, if a student goes to you and informs you that they are homeless and they were homeless prior to census day, you could report their program and report the day that they started to be homeless. Okay. Of course, you need to do your due diligence, and there are processes with regards to determining if a student is eligible to be homeless or not. Okay. And then, of course, what else? And the homeless student subgroup is collected in fall 1 as well as in end of year. So if a student was homeless at any point during the year, it could be just a day of homelessness, 2 days or 3 days, as long as they've approached you or they fill out a online form determining that they were eligible and you verified that, then you report them to CALPADS. GATE is basically a program for gifted and talented education students. So the criteria to determine GATE participation is determined locally. And so if you have a student who is GATE at the prior district, and you have GATE in your district, but then you probably may need to reassess the student because you may have different criteria in terms of how to determine GATE. So, and if the student turns out to be GATE, you report them with program code 127. English learners, the English learner data will come from your SELA status. Any student whose SELA status is EL or ADEL, ADEL is EL, then and their status date is before census day, on or before census day, then they are automatically part considered as EL. Now, if a student is ADEL, these are students who are adult students, but since who only speak foreign language, however, they are in grade levels K to 12, but since they're overage and they can't be tested in LPAC, instead of reporting them with a TBD, you report them with an ADEL status, and the student will be included in the LCFF computation. Language instruction programs. So if you are an OG in CALPADS, I think this was transitioned to as a program 4 or 5 years ago. Prior to that, and any student who was EL or is EL, LEAs were required to tell the state what type of instructional strategy were you using to help out these EL students. So that data element was then moved to the program side. So now you need to submit a program for each student who is EL, right? So you have to tell us if a student is if an EL student is receiving services. And then, of course, you also have to tell us what type of instructional program. So if it's any of this information here, so if a student who was determined to be EL based on the EL status opted out of the EL program, you mark them as 307. So there's a point of information here. So only 303, 305, and 307 and 300 are expected for EL students. So if you have, and why do we have an asterisk? More often than not, any student who may be EO, who is in maybe a charter school, who is catered to a community of like Spanish community or Ukrainian community, maybe because there's more influx of that, a Middle Eastern community or Indian community. And so they are focused with providing instruction to those groups of students. If you are an EO, I mean you're speaking fluent English and you are in this a student is enrolled in these classes, then you may report the student to be receiving these programs here: 301, 302, 304, 306. Okay. So 307, 305, and 303 should only be used for EL students. If you report any EO students in the same class that you're providing bilingual immersion programs, then you may report them as well with a LEAP program record. Okay. So another caveat here is that if a student was EL and they turn out to be RFEP now, you have to close those programs. Because you end up getting a CDD, wherein CALPADS will tell you, hey, this student technically not EL during this period that you're claiming them as receiving this type of instruction. So if the student turns out to be RFEP now, those LEAP programs needs to be closed out. All right, so we have your Title III eligible immigrant, and Alice is right on time. So with that question, so for Title III eligible immigrant, the data elements here are derived from your student information system, from the demographic records, right? So any student who is foreign born, meaning they were born outside of the 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico, and whose cumulative academic US schools for 3 years cumulative indicator is a yes, and their age is between 3 and 21, are automatically counted as Title III eligible immigrant. Okay? So, so if I am a student, I was born in Guam because my parents are in the military. My parents were stationed there. I was born in Guam, and now I'm moving to California. And this is my first, second, or third year in a U.S. school. Then I automatically qualify as long as you guys mark this as a yes. Okay, so this is the only thing that you guys have to be monitoring every year. The 3-year US 3 years cumulative years indicator should be monitored for the students. So after 3 years, those students should be marked as a no, and that's when they got taken out. They get taken out from this criteria. And so I hope that answers your question, Alice. So if at the 4th year the student is marked as a no, then of course, which is expected, then they will be taken out from that eligibility. All right, so we have here your student with disabilities. This subgroup is based on the 4 file types that you send up from your SEDS vendor if a student is a SPED student. So to be considered a student with disability, the student should be reported with the SPED status of eligible and participating, and it overlaps census day. And then a plan should also be reported, which makes them an active student with disability. And then, of course, you have here, you would also indicate the primary disability and the federal setting. So this information, the information from those 4 file types will then be included and reported in compliance to the federal requirements as well as in the state requirements. And then, of course, SPED disproportionality. Nate, do you want to chime in on this?
All right. So when we talk about disproportionality, there's new emphasis on it this year. And I attended a meeting with the CD SPED team, and there's some key points that we definitely want to get across. And if any members of your SPED team are here, Brandy's talking more about this in the road shows, which we'll point to in the wrap-up section of today's training. The disproportionality data will be pulled from the initial certification deadline rather than the close of the amendment window. So that's December 13th, and we emphasized that earlier. And this is significant because those who are found, those LEAs are found significantly disproportional, the same disproportionality for a 3-year period, are required to set aside 15% of their IDEA funds for comprehensive coordinated early intervention services, that CCEIS. So just think about the impact of this, right? You have students with disabilities throughout your district. You have a budget, you know what your funding is being allocated to, and then the state comes in and says, no, give us 15% of your budget and set it aside for this group of students. They're not taking the money, but they're telling you how to spend it. And so if anybody's been in that situation, it's not the best, right? If you could just imagine having your bills for the month and someone comes and says, oh, no, we don't care about your mortgage, your car payment. We need this amount of money to plan a party. And I don't want to trivialize the importance of the money for the students that are disproportionate, but I'm just saying someone else allocating how you spend your money is significant. 15% is no joke, right? And so if it's at all possible, you don't want to report disproportionality. In some cases, it's not possible. It may be a situation that's unpreventable. It is just what the data shows how it is, but early in identification may help you budget. You're going to have to work on an 85% budget because 15% you can anticipate getting set aside. So either way, you want to identify disproportionality as early as possible. And this decision to harvest the data earlier than in years past emphasizes the need for accurate race and ethnicity data reporting by the initial certification deadline, and necessitates the collaboration for the SEDS and the SIS data coordinator. So we're all SIS data coordinators. We work in a student information system. The race ethnicity data for all students, including students with disability, comes from the SIS. But we have to understand the SEDS data coordinator, they have their own data collection. As part of identifying students that are eligible for services and creating plans, they have to meet with the parents. So it's highly more likely that they can have more complete information than what might be reported online during an enrollment survey. They're actually meeting with the parents, right? And so you want to make sure that the race ethnicity data in the SED system for the students with disability is mirrored in your student information system, which is going to submit it to CALPADS. So that's the coordination that is needed. Also, when we cover the reports and we come up with some methods of how to identify disproportionality, you want to share this with your SEDS data coordinator as well. And then, if we're unfamiliar with disproportionality, it refers to the overrepresentation of a particular racial or ethnic subgroup in 4 areas, and that's general education, or we're over-identifying students of a specific race or ethnicity as eligible for special education within a specific disability category. So among those students with disability, a student of a particular race or ethnicity are overrepresented in the disability category. And then more restrictive environments. The placement of a certain group of students is overrepresented. And then your discipline data, disproportionality identifies those students with disability, race or ethnic groups who are over-disciplined or disciplined with particular actions more than the other. And then the reason why I wanted to take over for Kyron is if I drag this in front of you, well, first, you can go to the disproportionality website. When I'll copy this link and drop it in the chat, and you could download the list yourself. If you scroll down, you have the 2024 disproportionality LEA list. It will again reiterate disciplinary action, that's end of year 3 data, suspension and expulsion, placement, more restrictive environments, special education in general, special education with specific disability. And then it'll bring you here. And so the majority are going to be a race and white, and then the primary disability, emotional disturbance, you see the ethnicity, Hispanic, specific learning disability. The majority will be race or ethnicity, and then specific disability, and you can see that. But there is an example, if I could find, here you have white, and they're over-identify white students for emotional disturbance, also white with impairment, and then Hispanic with learning disability. You have Hispanic with other health impairment. So this is the primary disability, ethnicity, African American specific learning disability, again, race and primary disability. But then you see Asian, right? That's the race. And then this is your separate schools. This is the LRE, the restrictive environment. This would be your program setting, right? Separate schools. And then you also have Asian under 40%. So part of least restrictive environment is how much percentage of the time they spend in a regular classroom. And you have your 3 different categories, 0 to 40%, 40 to 80, 80% or more. So you can see that this has been identified as disproportionate. So that you could review the website and get a better understanding, or, point to this when you share this information with your SEDS data coordinator. And then if you scroll through these, you'll see a few more examples of where you will see the setting in separate schools, right? So, like I said, a large part of it is the race and the primary disability, but you do see the least restrictive environment included in sometimes. So, I find it interesting, but it helps you understand the different categories here.